every shot from a film we watch takes on a certain perspective, something we can imagine seeing with our own eyes. This could be handheld, close-up, or wide. One can argue that these are all human ways of looking. But what happens when a film stops looking like we do? When its perspective becomes something else, something that doesn't quite belong to a body at all? My name is Noah Tentadue, and I'll be your host on this trip through the eyes of Kubrick's Overlook Hotel as we investigate from whose perspective audiences are really watching this film from. This will be evidenced by establishing some relevant theoretical foundations of camera movement, before then looking at examples from The Shining of how Kubrick's use of uneasy camera movement sees in ways no human ever could. This is The Shining and the Disembodied Gaze. In 1975, Garrett Brown and Edmond de Julio invented the Steadicam. This is basically a body-mounted stabilization rig that isolates the camera from the operator's movement thanks to counterweights, allowing the device to keep the camera very steady. They sent out a demo reel of the device to many prominent filmmakers, and Stanley Kubrick was instantly hooked. In a textual message to Edmond de Julio, Kubrick wrote, "Demo reel on hand held mystery stabilizer was spectacular, and you can count on me as a customer. It should revolutionize the way films are shot."
Brown, 786.
Kubrick wasn't exaggerating. As Jean-Pierre Gaines explains in Visuality and Power, the work of the Steadicam, earlier forms of camera movement, handheld and dolly, always carried visible traces of human body behind them. Handheld shots revealed ups and downs, bumps and joggles. Gaines, 11. Just the normal mishaps produced by any operator's physiology. While the dolly's motion was bound by its massive physicality, has turns it cannot make, complex movements it cannot perform, and times when its tracks become visible to the camera. Gaines, 11. The Steadicam breaks this logic. Its stabilizing arm and vest create a necessary distance between the camera operator and the camera itself. As Gaines explains, to achieve this effect, the camera itself must at all times remain untouched by human hand, held instead at arm's length and thus effectively divorced from the usual tight embrace of the handler. Gaines, 12. Therefore, one could say that the Steadicam distances the filming process from the tactile experiences that these earlier systems often produced. Dr. Donato Totaro notes that the lack or less of a personal enunciation in the Steadicam may be why the Steadicam is so good to announce a non-human presence. Totaro, 3305-3313. In other words, because Steadicam movements essentially remove the human element of the filming equation, its camera movement appears detached from human perception, allowing filmmakers to construct a gaze that feels unanchored from any human character. This is the very heart of this video essay, the idea that The Shining is a film presented through a disembodied gaze. Now, first and foremost, The Shining follows Jack Torrance as he moves into the Overlook Hotel as the winter caretaker with his wife Wendy and son Danny. As the story progresses, the isolating nature of their situation begins to wear on the family when paranormal activity begins in the hotel. Now, let's look at some examples of shots where Stanley Kubrick exemplifies a disembodied gaze in The Shining. We start from the sky. One of the film's opening shots features the camera drifting over the mountains, following Jack Torrance's yellow Volkswagen as it winds its way towards the Overlook Hotel.
The Shining, 1 minute 10 to 1 minute 40.
The shot is calm and impossibly steady, suspiciously perfect, one could even say. Indeed, there's no visible helicopter wobble, because yes, this is a helicopter shot. No sense of a person holding the camera either. The shot feels detached, like the point of view of something that's simply watching. Scholars have long associated aerial vision with a perspective that is fundamentally non-human. As Paula Ahmad explains in her study of aviation-era visual culture, from God's eye to camera eye, aerial photography's post-humanist and neo-humanist visions of the world, the aerial view has acquired the status of a distant, dehumanizing, transcendent perspective of those ultimately in power. Ahmad 67. It is a gaze that looks down from a position no person could physically occupy, a view that isn't dependent upon the limitations of the human body. Hence, even before we reach the hotel or begin to use the Steadicam, Kubrick hints that The Shining's perspective won't belong to Jack, Wendy, or Danny. It'll belong to something else. Take the famous tricycle shot as another example of this. Here, the camera glides a few inches off the ground as Danny pedals through the Overlook Hotel's seemingly endless hallways.
The Shining, 2833 to 2909.
The camera follows him so smoothly that it stops feeling like a camera. It feels like something else trailing him, discreetly breathing down Danny's neck. Here, the Steadicam's masterful fluidity builds exactly the kind of camera movement that Gaines goes on to explain in his text. In fact, he suggests that the visual logic provided by the stable nature of the Steadicam aligns with Ernst Cassier's notion of Euclidean space, which possesses the attributes of continuity, infinity, and uniformity. Gaines 15. This is precisely what makes this type of camera movement so terrifying in The Shining. Indeed, the camera movement's endless and unbroken quality creates a space in the Overlook Hotel that appears so perfect that it stops feeling real. And so, what begins as elegance ends as something cold and almost mechanical, presenting to audiences a perception of the narrative world that only the camera could really see from. Later in the film, in the shot where Wendy backs away fearfully from Jack on the staircase after finding the worrying book he's been writing all winter, the Steadicam tracks her retreat with unnatural calm.
The Shining, 12507 to 12512.
Even though both characters are trembling and screaming, the camera glides upwards as if unaffected by their panic. That mismatch between chaotic bodies and eerily composed camera is exactly what makes the moment so unsettling. Jean-Pierre Gaines notes, quoting Lotte H. Eisner in Murnau, that the Steadicam creates what he calls a play of pure movement, Gaines 10, a kind of motion freed from the physical limitations and emotional instability of the human body. Because the device keeps the camera untouched by human hand and held at arm's length from the operator, Gaines 12, the shot doesn't absorb any of the panic happening on screen. It doesn't tremble with Wendy, but instead simply glides through its ascending of the staircase with a calmness that no human in the scene could possibly have. This exact same dynamic manifests once more in the shot of Danny running through the maze in the snow as he tries to escape the bloodthirsty wrath of his father.
The Shining, 14928 to 14942.
Here, the Steadicam follows behind him, gliding in a predator-like fashion whose freedom is reminiscent of that pure movement, Gaines 10. Again, the motion is so steady that it cancels out any sense of urgency we should feel in a chase. Danny's frantic movements are contrasted greatly by a gaze that doesn't share his fear or exhaustion, creating tension for the viewers. In one of The Shining's final shots, the camera performs with a Steadicam a slow track-in towards a framed photograph of the Overlook Hotel on the 4th of July, 1921.
The Shining, 15532 to 15628.
Unlike the earlier Steadicam shots that drifted freely through space, this one moves in a more straight, deliberate motion. Yet, the important point is that the mode of vision remains the same. In discussing the Steadicam's logic of movement, Jean-Pierre Gaines notes, the Steadicam possesses the uncanny ability to float through space as if it were truly unfettered from gravity and materiality. gains 15. And so, even in a slow, more linear approach towards a static object, this gravity-defying, dematerialized motion persists, allowing it to maintain the same inhuman visual logic that it used to define the rest of the film. The camera no longer follows a character, but it continues to see in a way that is not attributable to any human point of view. Its movement remains too controlled, too stable to belong to any character inside the story. In this sense, the camera movement here evidences once more how this is the same non-human perspective, now directed at a photograph instead of a living figure. In other words, the perspective of the film has not changed in its final few shots. Its object of attention has. Earlier, it observed Danny, Wendy, and Jack with an impossible steadiness. Now it fixes that same impossible steadiness onto the image that concludes the film. And this makes perfect sense narratively, because by this point, Jack is dead, Wendy and Danny have escaped, even Dick Halloran was just murdered a moment before. And so, the disembodied gaze that pursued them now has nowhere left to go. Now, you might be asking yourself, Noah, all along you've been talking about the audience watching the film through a disembodied gaze, but whose gaze is it? Really? And to that, I say, the answer's been right under our nose the whole time. It's the Overlook Hotel. I mean, think of it. From its hypnotic symmetry to the ghosts it houses and seemingly relentless will to turn people insane, the Overlook Hotel has proven time and time again that it has a character of its very own, and the camera movement, as we've been looking at all along, acts as the vessel to communicate the presence of the space within the narrative, effectively bringing it to life. So when we talk about a disembodied gaze in The Shining, we're not just talking about a technical style of camera work, we're talking about the Overlook Hotel itself, a building that sees and hunts its victims until the bitter end, where its perspective is ultimately contained into an image representing the very ghosts that forever live within its walls. The Steadicam promised freedom, a way for cinema to see without the limits of the body. But in The Shining, this very freedom turns into horror. Kubrick shows us what happens when the eye becomes too perfect, when it stops shaking, stops breathing, and ultimately stops being human altogether. And so, one can safely say that it's not the ghosts in The Shining that make the film so terrifying, it's the camera movement. Thank you so much for sticking till the very end. Here's my works cited.